level changes. Then we'll move into Decred, the organization. We'll sort of go over some of the workflows, our Politeia system, and what that means. And then just some closing thoughts and time for questions if you have any. Okay, so the introduction. I understand that this is a little bit of a wordy slide, so I'll just sort of go through some of the key points. Decred's self-funded, so we didn't do an ICO. We never have, nor will we ever need to. We constructed it in such a way that the protocol is actually able to fund itself. And a key part of doing this was, A, to ensure that the project had a sustainable method of resourcing, and to keep it free from third-party interests. The other big portion of it is to ensure that we had a well-incentivized model. So the Decred developers, when they did develop Decred, they were sort of given a small grant once the network was launched, which then gave them a positive incentive to actually continue to deliver value. So a little bit of historical context on Decred. It was founded by sort of two primary groups. One was Taco Time and Ingsoc, who are two pseudonymous individuals or group of individuals who were largely involved with the Monero project. So Taco Time actually originally forked Monero from Bytecoin back in 2013. The other group responsible for founding Decred was Company Zero. Company Zero were pretty prominent, and actually still are to this day, Bitcoin developers. So at the time, they developed the first full node alternate implementation of Bitcoin. So if you're familiar with Ethereum, Ethereum has multiple node implementations. You've got Geth, Parity, Mist, etc. In this case, BTC Suite was developed by the Company Zero team, and that was the first node implementation of Bitcoin that was not Bitcoin cores. Now, when they did develop it back in the early days, I believe it was 2012, rather than being met with praise, they're actually met with quite a bit of hostility. And I guess they sort of figured that, well, it's going to be extremely difficult to scale a decentralized project if we don't have some kind of formal dispute resolution mechanism for coordinating the actual humans involved. So Decred was kind of conceptualized as a continuation of Bitcoin that would build on many of the things that makes Bitcoin great, but then sort of addresses that human element a little bit more in a way that maintains network decentralization. So since then, the protocol was launched towards the end of 2015. The airdrop out to the first round of recipients was in Q1 of 2016. That's where 4% of the total supply was airdropped to several hundred members of the Bitcoin Talk forum who were incredibly active in the community. The rest, since then, it's all been mined through a mixture of proof of work and proof of stake mining. Q2 of 2017, we had our first on-chain vote and user-activated hard fork, which was a huge milestone in the project. And just recently, actually last week, we launched our Politeia proposal system. So that's sort of the second major milestone in our three-stage process to reaching the Decred DAO. Now, so how does the governance system actually work? So this is one of the core elements of Decred's model is actually its hybridized proof of work and proof of stake model. So one of the issues with a pure proof of work system is that you're giving all of the decision-making authority over protocol level changes to one stakeholder group. In the case of proof of work, it's the proof of work miners. Now, whilst proof of work miners are an incredibly important stakeholder group, they're not the only stakeholder group, nor will their interests necessarily always align with the other stakeholders. And so inevitably you see events like segregated witness, when we had the sort of SegWit and SegWit 2x drama and the block size debate. You had a lot of different stakeholder groups whose interests didn't necessarily align, conflicting and struggling to figure out, okay, how do we resolve the dispute, which inevitably led to a pretty contentious chain split. So Decred sort of splits it up between a mixture of proof of work and proof of stake. And in order to do that, you have to adequately incentivize all of those different parties. So to do that, we actually split the block rewards. So 60% of each block reward goes to the proof of work miners. 30% goes to the stakers to reward them and incentivize them to actually play a role in voting. And then 10% goes into that decentralized treasury to ensure that we have a sustainable source of resources. So the easiest way that I can kind of describe our governance process is with this graphic. If you were to sort of envision it kind of like an assembly line process, where you actually have the proof of work miners packaging and processing the blocks and signaling during proposals to make a protocol level change. And then the stakers are sort of there to enact quality assurance. So with each block that goes through, the proof of work miner has to include a certain number of the proof of stake voters' votes, and a majority of those needs to be in favor of the particular block type that they're signaling. If it's not, then that miner gets stripped of their reward and the block's invalidated. So it gives miners an economic incentive to ensure that they're following the demands of the broader network of stakeholders. One key thing to note there is absolutely no reason why a proof of work miner can't be a stakeholder as well. In fact, you would hope that they would be, because then it demonstrates network dedication. So a little bit about tickets and staking. So the tickets are what ultimately represents a stake and a vote. So the ticket is an amount of Decred that you're required to lock up. That amount fluctuates depending on how many tickets are in the pool waiting to go into a block at any one time. And so the tickets afford you voting rights. It kind of counterbalances the proof of work mechanism of Decred, and it provides you with a reward for taking a proactive approach to guiding the protocol. So staking isn't just about the rewards, though. It's important to know that the stakeholders wield immense power over the protocol, in that they are the ones that ultimately decide what protocol levels, what protocol level decisions do or do not get made. So we would obviously hope that those who do decide to play a proactive role in our staking process are adequately informed and genuinely interested in making change. So now moving on to the actual organization itself. And this is the part that I find really interesting is, to most people, outwardly, Decred probably just appears to be another cryptocurrency. But to me, it's really more than that. It's a new type of organizational structure, as I mentioned before, and a pretty interesting experimentation in human coordination. So Decred isn't run by a team of celebrity developers. There's no CEO, CTO to sort of guide everyone and tell everyone what to do. We actually use something called the Politeia proposal system. So Politeia is the ancient Greek word for a system of government. And the Politeia system is sort of a proposal system that enables anyone in the community to get up, and if they want to see something done, we'll put it into a proposal, lay out what you want to do, how much you expect to get compensated for it, what the schedule of it is, the timelines, the milestones, etc., and you put it forward to the community. The community then undergo a rigorous review process where they're able to comment on it, lay out concerns, debate, etc., and then they vote. And if approved, upon completion of the work, the individual will be compensated for it directly from that decentralized treasury fund. So something that I find extremely interesting about Decred is, obviously, if you want true decentralization, that decentralization needs to manifest itself both in a diversity of interests, but also a geographical diversity and a diversity of cultures. So what's particularly interesting about Decred is it's now built by over 60 contributors, and they're pretty geographically diverse. I mean, quite a few are in North America, granted, but we do have a lot of people contributing out of South America, quite a few in Europe, some in Africa, and a handful in Asia Pacific, including myself. So we have individuals on every single major continent on the planet, with the exception of Antarctica. And something to consider in Decred's model is that our users are what really count. It's the stakeholders really that are there to decide what decisions do and do not get made. And sort of something key to note here is that oftentimes people critiquing the project will sort of put out the argument that, Decred's a plutocracy. Personally, I consider that to be a pretty shallow argument, because Decred isn't trying to be a one-person, one-vote democracy. Decred's an opt-in alternate financial system for those of which it aligns. And it's not simply that those who hold the most Decred are going to have the most influence. Now, they could, but what's important to remember is that In order to place a vote and play a proactive role in guiding the Decred protocol, you have to do so at the expense of liquidity. So because of that, you have to deal with the consequences of your actions. So the whole point is that if you want the right to vote in the Decred system, you have to lock it up and ensure that you have skin in the game. So in that regard, it's sort of more akin to a traditional organizational structure where, we wouldn't have a problem with a company's shareholder having more influence over, say, an intern that's working there for a month. It'd just be silly to suggest that we would. So I think something that I find interesting with Decred is quite often you sort of have people coming into the project and they're saying, why isn't this being done? Why don't we, could someone do more here or more there? And I imagine that for some people it's extremely difficult to, it's extremely difficult to sort of wrap their head around the concept of an organization that isn't explicitly run by a central team. So I've got to sort through the slides here quickly. But the thing in Decred is we kind of operate with the mantra of be the change that we wish to see. So if you come into the community and you see something that needs doing and you'd like, or there's something that you'd like to see improved, and nobody else is working on it, well, the protocol's been designed in such a way that you have all the tools to just simply get up and do it yourself if you wish to see it. So that was the whole point behind Decred. So where to now? On that note, it's kind of difficult for me to say because Decred, what Decred ultimately becomes isn't for me to decide or any one person to decide. The whole point of Decred is that it's been designed in such a way that it will continuously evolve and adapt, and we've made it particularly easy for people to do that. So people often say to me, what's Decred's use case? Well, it's a pretty simple answer, actually. Governance is the use case. What comes after you've implemented the governance system is really up to the users at that particular point in time to decide. So if I was to leave you with one thing today, though, it's think about how powerful the idea of an alternate financial system is that you can not only have full transparency over, but that you can also influence. How silly is it that one would choose to store their livelihood or their wealth in an opaque financial system which they literally have absolutely no influence over, whether it be gold or whether it be the fiat banking system or even the stock market. In our case, the method in which you choose to store your wealth is something that you can also guide over time and ensure that whilst you are storing it using that mechanism, it'll be aligning with what your interests are at the time. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and I'm more than happy to take any questions if there are any.
Hello? All right. So with Politeia, what's been, assuming people don't always agree on every proposal, what's been one of the more polarizing proposals that's gotten a lot of, gotten people fired up in terms of, anything from technical to governance? Or
there's kind of been two, so Politeia at the moment has been primarily dealing with things that are, well, not protocol level changes. So we do that through the on-chain process. But two of the ones that have been surprisingly contentious one was actually a proposal for the Decred decentralized exchange. So a handful of the Decred developers were actually the ones who wrote the code for cross-chain atomic swaps. And since then, they've been experimenting with how atomic swaps can be leveraged to build a decentralized exchange. And that was actually one of the first proposals that went out, that actually went out before Politeia. And what surprised me about it is that it was actually put forward by Jake, who's one of the Decred founders. And rather than the community just sort of, rallying as if it's God's word, there was actually quite a bit of pushback on it. And to me, that was kind of refreshing to see. There was quite a bit of debate over whether it was a good use of development resources, particularly since it was a platform that wasn't explicitly for Decred, nor necessary. So I did like to see that. the other one that's sort of surprisingly contentious at the moment is actually between two different PR firms. So we have a PR, a lot of people have been asking us why we don't do more marketing, et cetera. A big reason was because, well, if we were going to go with a firm to do a big structured marketing and PR campaign, we wanted to put it through Politeia. And it's just been so exciting to see now that we have these two large PR firms that have put up these proposals, and the community are just rallying behind it. There's a lot of comments, a lot of discussion and debate, and what's been really amazing to see is that the actual PR firms themselves have gone and read through that discussion and debate and altered their proposals to reflect what the community's been discussing. So it's kind of been a little bit awesome in that regard. That being said, we haven't had too many proposals go through yet. Any other questions?
So you said the protocol level stuff you do not change, so BIP9 signaling, standard stuff?
Yeah. So how it works is during the signaling period, the miners will include a certain number of votes at random that are waiting in a pool to be added into a block. And a majority of those votes just have to be in favor of the particular block type that's being signaled. So if we were going through segregated witness and a block came through that was, it included 3 votes, 2 of which were pro-SegWit, and the miner was putting forward an anti-SegWit block, then the block would be invalid and the miner wouldn't get the reward. And then over a particular signaling period, we have to achieve 75% or greater stakeholder approval for the change to actually get implemented. But what's particularly interesting about Decred's model is it's not just soft signaling, right? So it's not, if a vote goes through and it passes, that decision's binding. So there's no development group to sort of veto that. And what actually happens is typically there'll be one vote to decide whether or not people want to see development begin on a particular feature. Then once the development's complete, the code will actually be embedded but not yet activated. And then we'll undergo another voting process, and the results of that will determine whether that code gets activated. So that gives the community sort of time to test and review the code, and then it ensures that if that decision, if the vote passes, there's nothing anyone can do to veto that and stop it, and the code automatically gets updated. So that's why our governance is specifically termed on-chain governance. Yes?
Do you think there's any risk with these new miners that are coming out being like 600% more powerful than what was quote unquote the most powerful thing ever, 6 months ago? Do you think there's a risk to the demand for mining Decred to dry up because it's like the tail wagging the dog?
Not really. Like for us, ASICs aren't really a problem for us. I mean, ASICs are a problem in the context of a pure proof of work system because it's become so commercialized and there's a huge barrier to entry to the average miner, right? So because that it's kind of been centered around these large mining cartels, which then are able to exert their influence. But because we sort of counterbalanced that with the proof of stake mechanism, which really was to tame the ASIC miners, sort of powerful mining cartels really don't matter too much to us. The other thing is we didn't want to go with ASIC resistance because A, I'm not convinced that it's even possible to begin with. And B, I don't think that ASIC resistance is any better than having ASICs because if you're relying on GPU mining, there's absolutely zero way that you can ensure that your miners are dedicated to your network. And most GPU miners are doing it purely for it's purely commercial decision. They don't really care too much about the coin that they're mining. And a lot of times they're just running an algorithm that automatically switches between all these different coins, whatever's most profitable at that given day, right? That's a massive problem because then you've just got huge amounts of hash power just jumping between networks. Whereas in our case, we actually had, we went with a more unique cryptographic hashing algorithm rather than, say, Script, which is used by Litecoin and a ton of other coins, or even SHA-256, which is used by Bitcoin. And one of the primary motivations for doing that was because if ever our protocol became popular enough for someone justify actually producing ASICs specifically for Decred. It would ensure that whoever does end up going and purchasing that hardware would be dedicated to the network. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but in our case, yeah, the whole point was to sort of balance out the power of the ASIC miners.
Well, I respect that. Follow-up to that, if only one miner,
Yeah.
in theory, in the next, call it quarter, is going to be cash flow positive,
Mhm.
what do you think that will do to the rest of the mining network? I mean, is everyone that has the, GPUs or the first round of ASICs or even the second round of ASICs supposed to mine at a cash flow loss to support the network, or?
I think it's going to be pretty difficult for the people that are mining with GPUs, right? That day is long gone.
But even
Yeah.
like an Ivy Link ESM16, for
Yeah.
instance, that miner 6 months ago was light years ahead of everything. There's
Yeah.
something coming out that's 6 times as more powerful. It's going to take that Ivy Link and make it cash flow negative in the next
Correct.
by the end of the year.
I don't think there's much you can do about it. That's just sort of really with any cryptocurrency, that's the nature of ASIC mining, is there's the cycles, and being profitable is sort of maintaining an awareness of those hardware cycles. Where I admit that it is probably difficult in the context of Decred is because the first range of Decred ASICs are only just coming out now, like literally it's been this year. We've now got 4 different manufacturers, right? No one's really had time to sort of get a feel for what those hardware cycles are yet. Plus, of course, there's occasionally a little bit of sketchiness with some of the hardware mining manufacturers where they sort of front-run the general market and then sort of release old hardware to them. But yeah, I think it's probably more a consequence of just the fact that Decred ASICs are so new. That being said, you could probably switch them over to, is Sia using the same cryptographic hash function? It's not. Yeah, I suppose there's just not much really you can do. It's just sort of a consequence of it being so early, to be honest with you.
And I'm not talking about my specific purchase or whatever, but I'm just talking about the network in general.
Yeah.
Is Decred worried that in theory one model of one miner can knock
Right.
out everything else? I mean, to me that's, you talk about mining cartels,
Yeah.
you talk about 51% attacks, with something that powerful coming onto the network. I think there's a big risk there that possibly isn't being addressed.
I see. So your concern is more over the fact that all of the manufacturing might be centered around one specific.
Yeah, because if
Yeah.
everything else is not profitable,
Mhm.
right? If everybody else is mining at a loss,
Yeah.
they're going to say, screw it, those things are bricks, turn them off. And this one rig who, let's just say, they only sell to X, whatever. I think there's an underlying problem there that, a lot of coins aren't seeing that, hey, well, wait a second, we're becoming codependent on one manufacturer, on one machine, on possibly one group of people mining our coin because everybody else isn't going to take a loss just to mine our coin if the coin isn't going up in value.
I mean, it's theoretically possible, but it's incredibly unlikely because then the elements of free markets come into play, right? It's pretty unlikely that one manufacturer is going to have perpetual dominance over chip manufacturing, especially when there's so much to be understood and developed in the context of Blake 256 mining. But yeah, I mean, it's possible, but it's sort of based on the assumption that more companies aren't going to sort of emerge with or even existing manufacturers aren't going to introduce updated models.
But if it's not profitable,
Yeah.
don't you think the demand, if it's not profitable, the R&D, I don't think the mining companies are going to put the effort towards, we're not going to put $20 million into developing a new miner if it's not profitable for anything else but, the top dog. I think there's a risk there that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I mean, it's potentially possible, but pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I think with anything in the ecosystem, right, it's impossible to build an absolutely foolproof system. All you can do is build a system that's as difficult as possible or as inconvenient or as unlikely as possible to compromise, right? even the critical infrastructure that we have today, right? A lot of the banking systems and international interbank settlement systems are incredibly insecure. So yeah, it's just impossible to build anything that's completely foolproof. But probably my only argument is that it's fairly unlikely.
Josh, just to clarify, so even though they may have a 51% of hash power, right?
Here, we can't hear you back.
If they have a 51% of hash power, they also need something like 75% of votes.
Well, and
To
that was my earlier point, is that in our case, even if you did have a particularly dominant mining cartel, it's balanced out by the actual staking portion of the currency. So we actually did a comparison. So there is a paper somewhere, I believe it's called something along to the effect of apples to apples, Decred is 20 times more expensive to attack than Bitcoin. And the article sort of goes through and lays it out that if all things were considered equal between Bitcoin and Decred in terms of the amount of total network hashing power, et cetera, the Decred network would actually be 20 times more expensive, or it may even have been 40 times more expensive to attack. And it's specifically because the miners would also need 75% or greater stakeholder approval. So I guess the point there being it's potentially an issue, less so much in our case. I think probably potentially the danger there would be in circumstances where a company like Bitmain emerges that do have some kind of dominance, total dominance over the production of mining hardware, and then actually sneak in some kind of backdoor system. I know that Bitmain and some of their miners actually had a kill switch. That would potentially be concerning. But again, any damage that it did would likely be quite temporary rather than long-term.
So you stated earlier your position of thinking that being of the opinion that trying to be ASIC resistance is futile. But how would you, if it did become necessary? I mean, I think my viewpoint of this sort of thing is that you can't really, there are no perfect solutions, and the only thing you can do is have a system in place that can react to the reality, and there is some possibility that somebody could totally dominate mining. So in that case, how would Decred react? You spoke about protocol level changes, but if it was something much bigger than that, a consensus change that involved a change in the mining algorithm, how would that be handled within the governance system?
And that's the great part about the governance, is if we did run into a scenario where one particular manufacturer did have total dominance, and that did start to become a huge problem, we'd just put it to a vote. And if the community, I imagine that different groups within the community would propose various different solutions. So some of them would be switching over perhaps to a GPU mining algorithm as opposed to an ASIC one, or one might be moving over to another cryptographic hash function. And then, yeah, we just put it up to an on-chain governance vote. So that's the whole point of Decred, is if such a problem did emerge, the community would just propose a change to the cryptographic hashing function that we rely on, and fork away from whatever dangers being caused by one dominant manufacturer emerging.
Anybody else have questions?
One more if you got time for it. I mean, we're
Sure.
heavily invested in Decred mining.
Sure.
You guys have time.
Okay. So, I don't know how to explain this, and I know that, obviously Decred cares more about the project than obviously the miners. We're just here to rape and pillage, I guess, but no, just kidding. But ultimately, the ASIC miners that have come out, okay, round one did not ROI, okay? Round two, which was, oh my God, nothing could touch it, will not ROI. 30%, I mean, we're 30% back on our money on those, right? Round three, that is coming out in November, which is going to knock everything else to the ground, only takes 4,000 of those miners to double the hash power of the network and cut the reward, right? So
I feel like, I don't know, maybe Decred needs to pay a little bit more attention to the fact that the mining elephant in the room, if you will, is fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me 3 times with this ASIC miner. I'm just treading water. Why am I even spending any money mining Decred if none of this is going to ROI? And I think y'all are going to run into a problem down the line where you've got this awesome algorithm, you've got this awesome project, you've got this awesome stuff that is legitimately light years ahead of everybody. I believe in the project. But to mine it, which is necessity to keep it alive, the demand's not going to be there because no one's going to make any money doing it. And if you're not going to make any money doing it, you might as well just buy the coin.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's not a problem that I personally was aware of.
Right.
I personally don't do proof of work mining. But I guess that's the thing, right, is when you say you guys or when you say Decred, right, it's a tricky thing because Decred essentially is its users, and that's kind of the change you want to see.
Right.
In the sense that if that is becoming an issue, Decred's been constructed in such a way that would thoroughly encourage anyone with sort of a particularly passionate view on something like that to bring the issue up with the community and sort of debate it and determine whether or not some kind of change that could rectify that needs to be proposed in the form of a protocol-level decision-making process. So exactly. You'd put it forward into a proposal and put it up. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that the community would rally behind and find incredibly interesting. I don't know if it's something that you've ever sort of brought up within any of the various mining channels.
You know, we're the new guy in the room.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we know what we're doing. You know, we have a pretty large facility, and you know, we've hired consultants and all that fun stuff along the way. And the one project that has stuck out to me that makes sense from a usability standpoint, from everything, like I'm happy. I'll put it this way. The one coin we're hodling, if you will, is Decred, okay? Everything else, we're like, buy, sell, move around. But Decred, we haven't sold a lick of it because we believe in the project. Ultimately, though, we've gotten burnt from a financial standpoint a couple times, and if the coin doesn't go up in value 6x in the next 2 years, which hopefully it will, whatever, we won't even make back our initial investment. So, which, you know, that's a business thing, whatever. At the end of the day, it is what it is. I'm just talking bigger picture that the Decred network needs either something changed or something manipulated, you know, via proposal, via your, you know, the vote, whatever, that ultimately makes it more sustainable to mine.
Yeah.
Because if you're not able to ROI your miner, and there's constantly something coming out better, faster, cheaper, I think people aren't going to care anymore.
No, fair enough. I mean, look, it's certainly something that I've never come across, and something that I'm personally very interested in. Like, I'd love to understand more about the risks that could be potentially posed by something like that. It's just not an area that I have a lot of subject matter experience in, right? So it's not sort of on my direct radar. But this is kind of
we actually have a mining, we had a mining session yesterday where they were talking about the benefits of mining, Decred and so forth, and some of the things. He is considered a whale within the industry, but also very skilled expert in mining as well. And he will actually be here again today. We have another mining panel that he will be on, and I highly suggest speaking with him afterwards.
Yeah, that would be
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Because this is exactly what the talk was sort of highlighting, though, right? Is this is what we want? It's stakeholders, whether you're miners or whether you're actual holders, right, or a mixture of the two, which you are, to get involved. And you know, we all have the power to bring up things where changes need to be made and sort of come to a consensus around whether or not something needs to be done about it. And that's kind of what's beautiful about the system, is that we actually have that mechanism to enforce that dispute resolution. So yeah, look, I mean, I would personally love to be able to be of more help to you, but it's just not an area where I have much subject matter experience.
And
But I'm very happy to hear that we do have a mining panel on next, so that'd be the perfect place to bring it up. What I can assure you, though, is that if you were to jump into any of our communications channels, so we have them all bridged together, and you did bring it up in one of the, we have a proof of work mining channel. I can promise you that it would be extremely well received, and you'd find a lot of people pitching in and chiming in and trying to rally behind a solution. So that happens frequently across all different areas of the project, and people don't always agree. Like there's a lot of really healthy debate that goes on. Yeah.
Hi, I'm with a group. I'm with Crypto IQ, so we analyze markets, and I'm looking at your price chart here because I'm just learning about your coin, and I see that there was a price spike, pretty healthy one, in late October. From your perspective, why did the price move? Did you make a software announcement? Can you?
That was, I believe that was probably the Binance listing. So we've,
okay.
Yeah, we've been in the process of trying to get a Binance listing for a very, very long time. But Decred, we're pretty unique in the sense that we don't pay listing fees. So obtaining a Binance listing without that listing fee was particularly difficult to do, and we finally managed to do it about 2 weeks ago.
All right, well, congratulations on that. We're also noticing, like my group is noticing that altcoins with good value propositions, like maybe like Polymath, have actually started rallying as the rest of the market has sat still. So, are you seeing interest from institutional investors, because they're coming like very big? Have you spoken with a hedge fund? Has anyone called you?
Yeah, I mean, we do on occasion interact with some institutional investors. Actually, Chris Buirski was just in the room. Placeholder VC have sort of quite a substantial amount of their portfolio in Decred and are big supporters of the project. But yeah, it does on occasion happen. It's there's not really much more I can say on that other than I mean that there is on occasion some institutional interest. I think one of the tricky things that we do often find though is, and I think this probably applies to most projects in the space, specifically as it relates to institutional investment, is there's so many other components that need to be built out and matured before the institutions can even start to get involved in a serious way. And by that I specifically mean things like custodianship, things like figuring out how staking works from a tax perspective in the context of a fund and all the reporting that a fund actually has to do. It's sort of magnitudes more complex as opposed to just an individual staking at the personal level. And then there's things like insurance products that just sort of aren't there. And I assume a large part of it is, whilst we are listed on many of the top tier exchanges, we don't really have any direct fiat on and off ramps. And I would imagine that starts to become quite an issue for a lot of institutional investors. Yeah.
That's okay. I just wanted to make the comment that I think it's a little bit self-defeating to, on the one hand, say we have a governance system that can make adjustments as necessary to everything, including the mining algorithm, and at the same time take a position that, well, we think ASICs are, ASIC resistance is futile and we're probably not going to do anything, because that mere state, it's important not only what you do but what you say, and that mere statement is an invitation to the ASIC guys to make the investment to do ASICs. I mean, it's my personal opinion that ASIC resistance in the long term is futile. It's also my opinion that over a long enough time horizon, ASICs themselves will be commodities and they'll be everywhere, and therefore they lose their power. But in the short term, the ASIC guys have to decide where to invest their money, and they're a lot less likely to invest their money on doing ASICs for Monero or Ravencoin, where we've come right out and said we'll do whatever we can to, as quickly as we can, to keep ASICs from dominating mining. So I think it's, you may want to re-examine not just what what you're doing in terms of a governance system, but what you're saying and whether you're inviting ASIC investment.
Of course we are. We have very little control over whether or not individuals start to produce ASICs for Decred. Also, it's important to sort of remember that my view doesn't necessarily represent the entire Decred community, right? It's my personal view that ASIC resistance is futile. It's also my personal view that it's not really the be-all, end-all solution to ASIC dominance. I actually think that it comes with a lot of risks that, as I outlined before, in terms of the ease of just simply switching between the various different GPU mined coins, that sort of introduces a risk vector which is just as significant and severe as, say, mining cartels having exclusive dominance over a pure proof of work or ASIC mined coin. So that's more my personal view. The point there being that ASICs aren't nearly as scary in the context of Decred's model because we're able to tame it with that proof of work component. If ASICs were to ever become a problem, that's where the governance system comes into play, and we just fork into whatever solutions get proposed and the community want to rally behind. Because at the end of the day, it's not the ASIC manufacturers that are making that decision, or sorry, the ASIC miners that are making that decision. They might be part of it if they're staking, but they're not going to, at the end of the day, their votes are also tallied with the broader stakeholder groups as well. Whereas in the context of Bitcoin, if ASICs ever became sort of catastrophically dangerous, it'd be extremely difficult for the community to fork them out, because at the end of the day, it's the ASIC miners that have that ultimate say. And then you end up with these, again, these Bitcoin Cash type scenarios where it just gets confusing and hash rate gets diluted and the community splits. The whole point of having our multi-stakeholder environment and on-chain governance is that those results are binding, they're on-chain, and we can bring finality to the dispute resolution process. But yeah, as for GPU mining versus ASICs, it's just my personal view that GPU mining is not the sort of angelic solution that it often gets pegged out to be. I don't see it as a problem necessarily, but the whole point was merely that I'm excited by the prospect of ASICs being produced specifically for Decred.
You have time for one last question.
Okay.
So I'm glad to know that y'all didn't pay a listing fee to Binance. I mean, that's encouraging that you got it on your own merits. But you mentioned that, something that's staving off institutional investors, maybe that there's not an on-ramp or off-ramp to fiat. And Coinbase is obviously like how consumers buy cryptocurrency. And they put out a list within the past month or two of a lot of projects that they're looking at, and I don't remember seeing Decred on there.
Oh, so that was the one where there was like 6 or so different projects, and they were saying that they were being considered for listing.
Yeah, so Decred was on there?
It was on there.
Yeah.
So what are y'all doing to make that happen?
Exchange listings are now this is an area that I have quite a bit of exposure to. I can tell you that exchange listings are a really, really difficult one to speak on. A, because there's a lot you can't say that you might know. And B, because even when you're interacting with them, there's a lot that you don't know because they won't tell you. So all I can say is that we've had extensive conversations with a lot of exchanges that have the top fiat on and off ramps. And we have for quite some time. We have good relationships with a lot of them. But on the fiat end, I think it's an order of magnitude more difficult for them to decide which coins do or not get listed, because I imagine that there's sort of a magnitude more paperwork and sort of regulatory and legal hurdles that need to be jumped through in order to make that decision. And a lot of it probably boils down to justifying the commercial decision to list a currency, where it needs to have the liquidity and the intrigue and the upside there for them to justify going through the process of listing another coin. That being said, I know that those hurdles are becoming increasingly less and less difficult for exchanges to jump through, or at least there's significantly less hurdles now than there may have been 12 or 18 months ago, but the hurdles are still there relative to, say, an unregulated crypto-to-crypto exchange. So probably the only thing that I can really say there is, yes, the conversations are being had. Yes, there are really good relationships with a lot of them. But again, it's probably one of those things where Decred itself needs to mature a little bit more in terms of the market interest before a lot of these large fiat on and off ramps can make the commercial decision that justifies the listing. And on that note, it's particularly difficult to drum up that interest when you're in the middle of a pretty brutal bear market. So I hope that once the market does begin to pick up again, it'll start to become a little bit more apparent whether or not that's likely to happen pretty soon. But 100% it is something that we do want and are fighting for, I can tell you that much.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Josh.
Of course.
Thank you, Josh. Let's give them all a round of applause, please.